The Woman in the House Across the Street from the Girl in the Window is a Netflix original miniseries released January of 2022 starring Kristen Bell. I like this series, or at least I liked a lot about it. But like a majority of reviewers and casual viewers and people who've just heard about it, they had mixed feelings. And that makes it hard for me to talk about because I wanted to talk about this story in as best light as possible and not sound so negative. I went into it not knowing anything about it. I originally thought that it was a movie. All I knew was the title, The Woman in the House Across the Street from the Girl in the Window. And it was obvious to me that it was a play on the titles of The Woman in the House and The Woman in the Window. This makes it abundantly clear that this is a parody. The series takes elements from both. A woman with debilitating phobias that causes her to be a recluse, brought on by the death of an immediate family member, and the plot of a woman witnessing a murder of a neighbor while looking through a window, spiraling into a psychological thriller that causes this woman to question if what she saw was real, and if so, what really happened, and who was the killer. I personally am not familiar with these stories it's poking fun of, but I do understand the concept, and maybe that is part of the reason I feel about it the way I do. From what I can tell, it does all these things right. Kristen Bell is amazing in this role. I was invested in her and the story that was unfolding. The series does a lot right. The mystery is very good. Kristen Bell pulled off the middle-aged woman dealing with trauma, emotionally broken, and taking too many pills and drinking to mask her issues. She knows that her life isn't ideal in its current state, and she does attempt to break out of her shell. Each episode ends with a great cliffhanger that keeps you invested in the story and wanting to figure out what is actually going on. But the issue with this series, in my opinion, is tone. What is tone in film? Well, basically, it's the mood and the atmosphere of the scene. The color palette used often reflects the tone of something you're watching. This show uses darker, gritty, realistic tones with a high saturation to make the scenes feel more real and true to life. Words characters use will also help with the tone of the story. This story seemed very serious and straightforward, and at times very intense. But this is a parody, and parodies are often humorous and exaggerations of a genre, and use bright colors to invoke that idea, and that's what I think it got wrong. Though it is definitely exaggeration of the genre of storytelling, the very serious tone in which we saw these exaggerations doesn't fit. So when we see something like over-the-top sized wine glasses, it doesn't seem that wild. These glasses do exist, and maybe this is just a person who does in fact have an extra large wine glass that fits a whole bottle of wine in it. But our main character has a fear of rain, to the point that she collapses and passes out. But when we see this, it's without context. Even with, this seems like something that can happen and that a person may have a fear of. And mostly because it's played so real and it's beautifully shot, it made me seriously worry about the character for the first time it happened. And because we didn't know what was going on, we had no reason to take it as a joke. And before you say, hey, it's a parody, of course it's a joke. I went in knowing this was a parody, but ended up feeling like it was not. The handyman, who we keep seeing day after day working on the mailbox, was another thing that didn't hit the nail for me. I noticed him the second day of the story, and I thought it was strange. It made me question, is this even real? Is this all in her head? Is there no reason for someone to be working on a mailbox all this time? Is she so out of it that she doesn't notice that he hasn't finished? Something that would be a simple task. It gives a great psychological vibe that was a nice bit to help me question the reality of what was going on. But in the end, it had no real bearing to the story, but to be a joke that the handyman had been working on the mailbox for years. And when that information is stated, I then understood why that choice was made. But again, it in itself did nothing to move the story forward. It was just a reason to introduce the character of the handyman. We could have seen him doing other things on the property, planting trees, cutting the grass, and it wouldn't have changed anything. This made it counterproductive to my personal ideas of if our narrator was reliable or not. Don't get me wrong, I do love these kind of stories, figuring out who did it and what's going on. And because it doesn't feel like a parody, I really wanted to figure out who the killer was. But when we get to the end, with many fake outs, and finally see who the real culprit is, I felt it was so unrealistic. Though they did give hints to this ending, it seemed like it was impossible to figure out. And because of that, I kind of wish I wasn't so invested in the story. I felt tricked. It was not done in fair play. I think most others likely find that the tone is too straight, even if they don't realize it. It didn't feel tongue-in-cheek. I saw no real meta-commentary, and the obvious extreme ideas and lines of dialogue were played in a way that made it seem like it was bad writing, not that it was made to make fun of the genre. It seemed more like a high-budget B story, and because of that, I understand why it doesn't click with everyone. I think if you took out the comedic elements of the story, it would be a great thriller, a really good thriller, a great series, one that a lot of people would probably like, only because the comedic points don't land the way it's supposed to. But if you wanted to make it a better parody, to me, I think it would have to be leaned into a lot more. I mean, beat us over the head with how ridiculous the premise is, maybe make the characters a little more self-aware in their dialogue, and that would get me and maybe other people out of the idea of taking this story too seriously. Again, I'm conflicted because I did enjoy the show. I enjoyed the acting. I enjoyed a lot about this, but those little bits of story that was ridiculous did not land the way that I think they wanted it to. There was a nice mid-credit scene for a second season, and I'm not sure how that would even work because it was partially ridiculous in itself, but if it does get greenlit, I will watch it because I enjoyed it. I don't agree with the tone of the show, but it is very watchable, and I think on a second viewing, it would be funnier. If you haven't watched it yet, give it a chance. And though it seems like a serious story, don't forget that it's not a serious story. Some things won't make sense, and it's supposed to not make sense. And that in the end will make all the difference. I personally think that it's worth a watch, and I would give it at least one thumb up with a little tweaks here and there. I think it would be a great parody or a great thriller. Either way, if you've watched it, let me know what your thoughts are. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.